You're dead weight, Elena. Just a line item I'm cutting from the budget. My husband sneered those words at his own anniversary gala, right before handing me divorce papers in front of everyone. Julian thinks I'm just a decorative trophy wife who doesn't understand a balance sheet. He thinks he built a multi-billion-dollar empire with his own hands. What he doesn't know is that every brilliant pivot he ever made was my idea. For 5 years, I've been the anonymous legend known as the architect. Julian spent months begging for a meeting with me to save his failing company. Today, I finally walked into his boardroom and watched his face turn white. I'm not here to settle the divorce, Julian. I am the hand that fed you. And today, I'm the hand that closes the account. Subscribe to see how I took back the empire he thought was his.
The silk of Julian's tie felt cool between my fingers as I tightened the knot. To the world, this was the image of a power couple, Julian Thorne, the visionary CEO of Thorne Tech, and Elena, his elegant, quiet wife. The margins on page 12 of your speech are off by 0.2%, I said softly, smoothing the lapel of his $3,000 suit. If the analysts catch it during the Q&A, they'll think your expansion strategy is aggressive rather than calculated. I've highlighted the adjustment on your tablet. Julian didn't look at me. He was busy checking his reflection in the gold-rimmed mirror of the gala's private dressing room. Elena, darling, his voice dripping with practiced charisma. Tonight isn't about math. It's about vision. It's about energy. People don't invest in spreadsheets, they invest in me. He finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold. Try to enjoy the party. Stand by the bar, look pretty, and try not to talk about logistics. It bores the guests. I tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear and nodded. I didn't tell him that boring logistics were the only reason his company hadn't folded 3 years ago. I didn't remind him that I was the one who had stayed up until 4 a.m. rerouting his capital through offshore holdings to hide his early R&D failures. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of black ties and diamond necklaces. As Julian took the stage, the room went silent. He was a master performer. He spoke of innovation and a future built by his singular vision. From the shadows of the VIP lounge, I watched him. I also watched Chloe, a young social media influencer with a penchant for disruptive marketing. She sat in the front row, her eyes locked on Julian with a predatory gleam. When Julian mentioned the new era of Thorne Tech, he didn't look at me, he looked at her. After the speech, the applause was deafening. Julian stepped off the stage, but instead of coming to me, he headed straight for a group of major investors. Chloe joined them, sliding her hand familiarly onto his arm. I approached them, intending to warn Julian that the lead investor from the Grayson Group was looking for a reason to pull out. "Julian," I said, my voice calm, "we need to discuss the Phoenix project before you sign anything tonight." Julian's face darkened. He turned to his inner circle, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You see this?" Julian gestured to me as if I were a piece of furniture. "Elena, honey, the Phoenix project is for builders. You're just a line item I'm cutting." The circle of elites went quiet. Chloe stifled a giggle behind her champagne flute. Julian leaned in, his voice a sharp whisper that only I could hear. "I've filed for divorce. My lawyers sent the papers to the house an hour ago.
You're dead weight, Elena. You don't create value, you just consume it. I need a partner who shines, not a shadow that follows me around." He didn't wait for a response. He turned his back on me and raised his glass to the crowd. "To the future," he toasted, pulling Chloe closer. I stood there for a moment, the heat of 100 stares on my skin. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply turned and walked toward the exit. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, muffling the sound of Julian's laughter. Once inside the back of my car, I reached into my clutch and pulled out a second phone, the one Julian didn't know about. The screen glowed, reflecting in my eyes. I opened a secure messaging app and typed 3 words to my lead developer. Protocol 0, cut the life support. I watched as the message marked delivered. Somewhere across the city, the invisible pillars holding up Julian's empire began to crumble. "Where to, Mrs. Thorne?" the driver asked. "Don't call me that," I said, looking out at the glittering NYC skyline. "Take me to the penthouse on 57th. It's time to move back into my own life." As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Thorne Tech's internal server. The first algorithm had just been deleted. The penthouse on 57th Street didn't smell like Julian's expensive cologne or the forced lilies he insisted on keeping in our old home. It smelled of ozone, expensive leather, and the quiet scent of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. This was the headquarters of Vance Global, a space Julian didn't even know existed. I stepped out of my gala dress, letting the silk puddle on the hardwood floor. For 5 years, that dress and the woman inside it had been a prop. My phone chimed on the marble kitchen island. It was a private alert from Thorne Tech's internal server. Critical error, predictive algorithm offline. I took a slow sip of ice water. Protocol 0 wasn't a virus. It was simply the removal of my presence. For years, my proprietary code had been cleaning Julian's messy data in real time, making his erratic decisions look like genius-level risks that paid off. Without my code to stabilize the ship, Thorne Tech was about to face the gravity it had been defying for years. The next morning, the news was already buzzing. I sat in a tailored charcoal suit, my hair pulled back into a sharp, low bun. I looked at the tablet screen. Thorne Tech's stock had dipped 3% in pre-market trading. There was a knock at the door. "Enter," I said. Caleb Sterling walked in. He was the CEO of Sterling Industries and Julian's most persistent rival. Unlike Julian, who led with noise and ego, Caleb was known for his silence and his terrifyingly accurate market moves. He was also the only person in New York who knew exactly who the architect was. "You finally did it," Caleb said, sitting across from me. He didn't offer a polite smile. He offered a look of genuine respect. "The market is losing its mind. They're calling it a technical glitch, but I know a tactical withdrawal when I see one." Julian wanted a partner who shines. I'm just giving him the stage. He'll find it's much harder to dance when the floor is missing. Caleb leaned forward, sliding a contract across the table. "My board is ready to move on the logistics acquisition we discussed. If Vance Global backs us, we can absorb the shipping contracts Julian just let slip. But I have to ask, Elena, is this about revenge?" I looked out at the skyline, specifically toward the Thorne Tech Tower a few blocks away. "Revenge is emotional, Caleb. I'm making a market correction. Julian Thorne is an overvalued asset. I'm simply shorting him." Meanwhile, my second phone, the one Julian had the number for, began to vibrate. It was a barrage of texts. "Julian, Elena, where are you? The server is acting up. Did you change the admin passwords for the Phoenix folder?" "Julian, pick up. This isn't the time for a tantrum." "Julian, the investors are calling. I need those projections you were working on." I didn't reply. I blocked the number. "Let's sign," I told Caleb. "By the end of the week, I want every talented developer Julian has insulted to have an offer from us on their desk, double their salary, and offer them something Julian never could, credit for their own work." As Caleb left, I felt a strange, cold clarity. For years, I had been the ghost in the machine. Now, I was the machine. That evening, I watched a live stream of a tech press conference. Julian was standing at a podium, looking slightly disheveled. Chloe stood behind him, looking bored as she scrolled through her phone. "It's just a minor server migration," Julian told the cameras, his smile tight and forced. "Thorne Tech is stronger than ever. We don't need support staff to keep our vision alive." As he spoke, the teleprompter behind him flickered and died. The visionary hesitated, his mouth hanging open as he realized he didn't actually know his own growth statistics by heart. I turned off the TV and picked up my pen. It was time to make my first public move. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a text, it was a news alert. Breaking. Anonymous Whale, the architect, places a $100 million bet against Thorne Tech. The hunt had officially begun. The floor of the New York Stock Exchange wasn't a place Julian usually visited in person, but desperation has a way of changing a man's habits. From my glass-walled office at Vance Global, I watched the live feed of Julian pacing outside the exchange, his face pale under the harsh camera lights. Thorne Tech stock hadn't just dipped, it was in a free fall. "He looks like he hasn't slept in 48 hours, Caleb said, leaning against my desk. He held a tablet showing the morning's recruitment data. 3 of his senior architects just signed their contracts with us. They didn't even ask about the salary. They just wanted to know if they'd finally be allowed to put their names on their own patents." "Julian never understood that talent needs air to breathe," I replied, my voice steady. I was wearing a tailored cream power suit that felt like armor. He thought he was the sun, and they were just planets reflecting his light. He forgot that without them, he's just standing in the dark. I stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city moved in a blur of yellow cabs and gray pavement. For years, I had watched this view from Julian's shadow. Now the height didn't feel dizzying. It felt right. Later that afternoon, I attended the Global Tech Summit auction. It was a high-profile event where distressed assets were sold to the highest bidder. Julian was there, sitting in the front row with Chloe. She looked out of place in a neon pink dress that screamed for attention, while the rest of the room was a sea of calculated neutrals. When the bidding opened for Nexus Core, a specialized server farm Julian desperately needed to keep his remaining systems online, Julian raised his paddle immediately. "5 million, Julian called, his voice a bit too loud, a bit too eager. The room was silent. Julian looked around, a smirk returning to his face. He thought he'd won. He thought he still had the biggest wallet in the room. 10 million, I said, my voice cutting through the silence from the back of the hall. The entire room turned. Julian froze. He whipped his head around, his eyes widening as he saw me sitting next to Caleb Sterling. I didn't look like the quiet wife who stayed in the kitchen. I looked like the person who owned the kitchen, the house, and the land it sat on. "Elena?" Julian stammered, his paddle trembling. "Where did you get that money? You don't have that kind of money." 15 million, I said, ignoring his question and looking directly at the auctioneer. "Elena, stop this," Julian hissed, standing up. "You're embarrassing yourself. That's my asset. I need those servers." 20 million, I said calmly. The auctioneer hammered the gavel. "Sold to Vance Global." The room erupted in whispers. Julian's face turned a deep, bruised purple. He stormed towards me, ignoring the security guards. Caleb stepped forward to intercept him, but I held up a hand. I wasn't afraid of Julian anymore. He was a ghost from a life I'd already outgrown. "Where did you get that money?" Julian demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you steal from the joint accounts? I'll have you in jail by dinner." I leaned in, the scent of my expensive perfume hitting him like a physical blow. "Check the filings, Julian. Those joint accounts were funded by my private dividends for years. I didn't steal your money. I just stopped giving you mine." I walked past him without a second glance, leaving him standing in the center of the room as the cameras began to flash. By the time I reached my car, my phone was blowing up. But it wasn't Julian this time. It was his board of directors. They didn't want to talk to Julian's wife. They wanted an emergency meeting with the chairperson of Vance Global. They were ready to discuss a bailout. They were ready to betray him just like he betrayed me. "Drive," I told the chauffeur. "We have a company to buy." As we pulled away, I saw Julian on the sidewalk, frantically trying to hail a cab because his private car service had just been canceled for non-payment. He looked small. For the first time in 5 years, he looked exactly as large as his own merit, which was to say, he looked like nothing at all. The glass-walled conference room of Thorne Tech felt colder than usual. Outside, the New York sky was a bruised purple, matching the dark circles under Julian's eyes. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his fingers tapping a frantic, uneven rhythm against the wood. For the first time in his life, Julian looked small. His suit was wrinkled, and the confident smirk he'd worn for years had been replaced by a tight, nervous grimace. "The board is 3 minutes late," Julian snapped, glancing at his assistant. "Where are they? And where is Chloe? She was supposed to be here for the PR statement." "Chloe is busy, sir," the assistant whispered, looking at the floor. "She posted a video from a beach in Tulum an hour ago. She said the vibe in the office was too negative for her brand." Julian's jaw tightened so hard I could almost hear his teeth grind from the hallway. I stood just outside the frosted glass doors, watching through the narrow gap. Beside me, Caleb Sterling checked his watch. "He's waiting for a miracle," Caleb said quietly. "He still thinks he's the hero of this story. He's about to find out he's just a character I wrote." The heavy doors at the far end of the room swung open. The board of directors walked in, 6 men and women who had once laughed at Julian's jokes and ignored my existence at office parties. They didn't look at Julian. They sat down in silence, their expressions grim. "Finally," Julian said, standing up and smoothing his jacket. "Let's get to it. We have a temporary liquidity issue because of a technical glitch. I've drafted a plan to pivot our R&D focus. We just need a short-term bridge loan from—" "Julian, sit down," Arthur, the oldest member of the board, interrupted. His voice was tired. "The technical glitch is actually a complete collapse of our proprietary architecture. Our lead engineers have walked out. Our stock is being delisted. There is no pivot. There is only a survival strategy." Julian's face went pale. "I am the strategy. I built this company from nothing." "You built it on a foundation we're only now realizing you didn't understand." Arthur slid a tablet across the table. "We received a buyout offer this morning, a total debt-to-equity swap. It's the only way to keep the lights on and avoid a total bankruptcy." Julian laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Who would even have the capital to buy us right now? Grayson Group? They won't touch us." "Vance Global," Arthur said, "and they're waiting outside." Julian froze. I saw the gears turning in his head, trying to connect a name he'd only recently learned to the reality he was facing. "Vance? That's the firm that outbid me for the servers. Fine, if they want to bail me out, bring them in. I'll negotiate a seat on the new board." Arthur looked at Julian with something like pity. "They didn't ask for you to stay, Julian. They made your resignation a condition of the deal." The doors swung open. I walked in first, the click of my heels the only sound in the suffocating silence of the room. Caleb followed a step behind me, carrying a leather briefcase. Julian didn't stand up this time. He couldn't. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Elena? What are you doing? Is this some kind of joke? Did you hire Caleb to help you look important? I sat down at the opposite end of the table, directly facing him. I didn't look at the board. I looked only at Julian. I'm not here as your wife, Julian, and I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to sign the papers that officially make you a guest in my building. Julian slammed his palms onto the table, his ego finally exploding. Your building? I gave you everything. You were a ghost. You didn't even have a job until I married you. I reached into Caleb's briefcase and pulled out a single thick folder. I slid it across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of Julian's trembling hands. Open it, I said, and you'll see exactly who has been paying for your everything since the day we met. Julian's eyes darted to the folder, his hand shaking as he reached for the cover.
Julian's fingers fumbled with the edge of the folder. The room was so quiet that the sound of the paper sliding against the mahogany table felt like a gunshot. He flipped the first page, his eyes scanning the documents. I watched him. My posture was straight, my hands folded loosely on the table. I didn't need to pace or shout. Power is loudest when it's still. Julian's face went through a rapid series of shifts, confusion, denial, and then a sickening realization. He saw the bank transfers from shell companies he'd never recognized. He saw the signatures on the contracts that saved his reputation 3 years ago. Every single one was traced back to an entity called Vance Global. "This is impossible," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "The architect, the investor who saved the London merger, that was a laptop out of Zurich." "That was a laptop in our guest bedroom, Julian," I said calmly. "While you were out at clubs networking with influencers, I was rebalancing your ledger. I didn't just manage your life, I manufactured your success." Julian looked up, his eyes wild. He turned to the board. "She's lying. This is a fabrication. She was a housewife. She spent her days at the spa and her evenings at my side." Arthur, the board member, didn't look at Julian. He looked at me with a newfound, terrifying respect. "The signatures are verified, Julian. The capital that funded this company's inception didn't come from your family's trust. It came from a private account under the name Elena Vance. You've been operating on her credit since day one." I leaned forward, my voice dropping an octave. "You called me dead weight, Julian. You said I don't create value. But the truth is, you were the only line item in this company that generated a profit. You were the mascot. I was the engine." Julian's ego, the thing he had spent his whole life polishing, shattered right in front of us. He looked at the legal papers at the bottom of the stack. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "A debt-to-equity swap," I explained, as if I were teaching a child. "Because you defaulted on the private loans I issued through my shell companies, those debts have converted into shares. Combined with the stock I've been quietly buying up through Caleb, Vance Global now owns 51% of Thorne Tech." The silence that followed was heavy. Julian sank back into his chair, the air leaving his lungs. He looked at the logo on the wall, the name Thorne, and realized it didn't belong to him anymore. "You can't do this," he pleaded, his voice small. "Elena, we're family. We can fix this. I was stressed. I didn't mean what I said at the gala. Chloe, she was a mistake. We can be a power couple again. Think of what we could do together." I stood up. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel the rush of revenge. I just felt finished. There is no we, Julian. There is only the owner of this company and a former employee. I looked at my lead counsel. Hand him the termination papers. Termination? Julian gasped, standing up. You're firing me from my own company. It's not your company, I reminded him. You've been fired for gross incompetence and the misappropriation of funds. You have 20 minutes to clear your desk. Security will escort you to the curb. Julian looked around the room, searching for an ally. The board members looked away. Caleb Sterling stood by the door, his face a mask of professional indifference. Julian was truly alone. He began to weep, not out of regret for how he treated me, but out of the sheer terror of being ordinary. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to see his final exit. Instead, I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows behind the CEO's desk. This was the office he told me I wasn't dynamic enough to sit in. The city of New York stretched out before me, a grid of lights and infinite possibilities. I sat down in the high-backed leather chair. It was comfortable. It felt like it had been waiting for me. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from the news. Thorne Tech acquired in shock takeover. Elena Vance named new CEO. I turned the phone face down. For 5 years, I had been the ghost in the machine. I had been the silence that kept the world turning. But as I looked out at the horizon, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a shadow. I was finally in the light.